They looked like the perfect couple, Priscilla, a porcelain beauty frozen in time, and Elvis, the untouchable king of rock and roll. But behind the glittering stage lights and adoring crowds, a far more unsettling truth was unfolding. When she first met him, she was just 14 years old, stepping into a world of fame, control, and secrets that would ultimately shatter the fairy tale. By the time she married Elvis at 21, Priscilla had been carefully sculpted into the image he wanted, every gesture, every smile, every move part of a role she was expected to play. What looked to the world like a glamorous love story was, in truth, more of a performance than a partnership. And now, at 80, Priscilla Presley is shattering the illusion, revealing the real story of what drove her to leave the king of rock and roll. Long before Graceland, rhinestone jumpsuits, and sold-out arenas, Elvis Presley was just a shy boy with a worn guitar and a dream bigger than the small Mississippi town he called home. Born on January 8, 1935, in Tupelo to Gladys Love and Vernon Presley, Elvis entered the world just 35 minutes after his identical twin brother, Jesse Garon, who was tragically stillborn. That loss cast a lingering shadow over the Presley household, shaping the family's bonds in ways they would carry forever. Elvis was devoted to both of his parents, but his deep, almost inseparable connection to his mother Gladys would become the emotional anchor, and sometimes the chain, that shaped him for the rest of his life. She was his anchor, and he was her reason to keep going. Life in the Presley household was a daily battle for survival. The family lived in poverty, barely managing to put food on the table. Vernon drifted between low-paying odd jobs, and government assistance became their lifeline. But hardship hit even harder when Elvis was just 3 years old. Vernon was arrested and sentenced to 8 months in jail for forging a check, leaving Glady to fend for herself and her son. With their home gone and their future uncertain, the Presleys learned to endure, clinging to each other as their only source of stability. Yet, even in the midst of struggle, music found its way into Elvis's heart. The family attended the Assembly of God Church, where the air was thick with the soulful power of gospel music. It seeped into him, igniting a passion that would one day define an era. By the fall of 1941, Elvis was just another quiet boy walking the halls of East Tupelo Consolidated School. Teachers marked him as average, never suspecting the fire slowly building within him. But behind those shy eyes was a restless spirit, already searching for something greater, something that would one day lift him out of Tupelo's dirt roads and into the glare of the world's spotlight. At the age of 10, he stepped onto the stage for the very first time at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show. He performed Bold Shep and secured a 5th-place finish. He later recalled that moment, admitting he felt shy and uncertain, yet there was a spark within him that craved more. That same year, he received his first guitar as a birthday present. He didn't pursue formal lessons. Instead, he learned by observing. His uncles and the pastor at his church were his teachers. He once confessed that he never felt at ease enough to sing publicly, labeling himself too shy for the limelight. Nevertheless, he continued to practice. In 1946, he transitioned to a new school, Milam, for 6th grade. It was during this time that he began performing at school, bringing his guitar along. He faced ridicule for it. Other kids called him trashy and mocked him for playing hillbilly music, but he persisted. He was captivated by a local radio show hosted by Mississippi Slim. Slim's younger brother, a classmate of Elvis, once remarked that he was utterly passionate about music. Slim noticed him and taught him a few chords. He even arranged for Elvis to perform live on air twice. During the first performance, Elvis was gripped by stage fright, but he managed to push through and returned the following week to sing. In 1948, the family relocated to Memphis, entering a new town and a new school, L.C. Humes High School. Elvis was not exactly the star student. In 8th grade, he received a C in music. His teacher even told him he lacked a singing voice. Determined to prove her wrong, he returned the next day with his guitar and sang, "Keep Those Cold, Icy Fingers Off Me," in front of the class. Still, he kept a low profile. Some classmates teased him, calling him a mama's boy, and he seldom sang in public. However, at home, he was consumed by music. By 1950, he began to practice more diligently with Lee Denson, a neighbor, and jamming with a few local boys, two of whom, Dorsey and Johnny Burnett, would later help shape the rockabilly genre. By the time he reached his junior year, the boy who once blended into the background started to emerge. The look was equally as important as the sound. He began wearing gaudy clothing he had seen on Beale Street, growing sideburns, and slicking his hair back. He finally began arriving at school looking as though he owned the place since he admired the clothes from Lansky Brothers. Elvis eventually made his appearance at Hughes's yearly minstrel show in 1953. The audience was in awe when he performed Till I Waltz Again With You. Nobody had realized he was a singer. He once claimed that he had failed music and had never been popular in school. However, everything changed following that performance. The clapping gave him access to a door he had been clandestinely pounding on for years. Elvis never acquired the ability to read music. He hung around record stores, listening to the noises, playing everything by ear. In addition to being enamored with country music icons like Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, and Jimmy Rogers, he was also fascinated by Hank Snow. However, gospel singer Jake Hess served as a major inspiration for his ballad approach, and this influence could be heard in every slow, painful note that Elvis would eventually record. He frequently attended the downtown all-night gospel sings, when white gospel ensembles sang music with strong roots in black spirituals. He took it all in. Nor did he confine himself to gospel or country music. He listened to WDIA, a Memphis radio station that was among the first to play music and voices by black people. He listened to spirituals, blues, rhythm and blues with strong backbeats, and what were then known as race recordings. It sparked something inside him, and it was emotional and raw. Even though he might only have been permitted to enter specific blues clubs on specific white evenings, he was able to listen to the music on the radio and on the streets. He was deeply influenced by local black artists, including Rufus Thomas and Arthur Crudup. Their effect was audible when Elvis began recording at last. His music was alive with their voices and rhythms. Later, that clash of cultures would lead to controversy. However, shoplifting was never an issue with Elvis. It has to do with becoming. One thing was evident by June 1953, when he graduated. It was more than just a passion. He had no other plan. The prosperous career of Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley entered the Memphis recording service in August 1953. Not yet the storied Sun Records, but a humble little operation led by Sam Phillips. He was only a bashful teenager with 2 songs, That's When Your Heartaches Begin and My Happiness, and he wasn't there to pursue stardom. He claimed it was a present for his mother's birthday. Some thought he was only interested in recording himself on vinyl. However, the decision to visit Sun spoke more than he did. He desired to be admitted. The recordings yielded no results. Bands rejected him and he failed tryouts, but Phillips remembered his voice. Finally, on July 5, 1954, something clicked. At the end of a boring session, Elvis broke into Arthur Crudup's That's All Right when he and his bassist Bill Black were having a good time. There was no plan. It was vibrant, raw, and electric. Phillips captured everything on tape, and suddenly he had what he was seeking. The soul of black music might be channeled by a white child. The phones went crazy when Memphis DJ Dwayne Phillips played it. Elvis was believed to be black by the audience. On Live, Dwayne had to ask him which high school he attended. Coded evidence that he was white. They gave Blue Moon of Kentucky a juke joint twist 3 days later, and rockabilly was born. Elvis and the band were performing wherever they could by the end of 1954. They grabbed fire at Louisiana Hayride but bombed the Grand Ole Opry. At first, he was awkward. Next came the shouts, the hips, and the swagger. Teens were unable to get enough. They signed Colonel Tom Parker, brought on a drummer, and went on a frenzied tour by 1955. Radio had no idea how to handle him. He sounded too country for R&B and too black for country. Fans, however, didn't care. He was known as the Memphis Flash and the Hillbilly Cat. Additionally, RCA had purchased his contract for $40,000 at the end of the year. He was 20 years old. Heartbreak Hotel was released by RCA in January 1956. It was uncontrollable, dark, and bizarre. Presley recorded his debut album, lighted a fire, and appeared on television with the Dorsey brothers. For white years, he wasn't polishing black music. He was changing its shape. The piano was swapped out for a guitar. The beat was more intense. Elvis Presley, his debut record, became a #1 success. An anthem was created by Blue Suede Shoes. Despite his failure with the older crowd in Vegas, he managed to land a movie contract. The Milton Berle Show, with only Elvis and a spotlight and no instrument, followed by Hound Dog. He danced like nothing America had ever seen, worked the crowd, and slowed the beat. The girls were enamored, the press was horrified, and headlines cried out. Elvis wasn't merely successful by the end of 1956, he was unavoidable. Everything will never sound the same again after Elvis Presley came, and what began in a small Memphis studio turned into a cultural earthquake. However, despite his fame as a musician, Presley struggled in the love arena. Notoriety, wealth, and illicit relationships. Women noted the irresistible charm of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll and keeper of many hearts. Notoriety, charisma, a voice that oozed southern velvet, and mesmerizing movements. He had everything. A lengthy history of lovers, liaisons, and heartbreaks that lasted for decades followed. Rita Moreno was already attracting attention in Hollywood in the 1950s. It wasn't love, though, when she became involved with Elvis. It has to do with leverage. She believed that dating Presley would attract Marlon Brando, who was her true obsession. It was successful, but not without repercussions. She thought Elvis was boring behind the glitz and the newspapers. The enthusiasm wasn't shared. The fling was as short-lived as it was brief. June Wano was not like the others. For a few time, it felt genuine when she met Elvis in 1955. She wasn't a prize from Hollywood. She was grounded, someone who made him think about his origins. However, true love was not on Colonel Tom Parker's schedule because celebrity has its restrictions. Instead of small-town gals, he wanted Elvis to be marketable, unmarried, and surrounded by celebrities. The pressure increased. Beautiful women were escorted before him like awards. In 1956, one even made an appearance at Graceland for Christmas. That was the last straw. June gathered her heart and went for a walk. Natalie Wood followed. It had every element of a dream romance sponsored by the studio. A budding rock god meets young Hollywood nobility. Dennis Hopper put everything up, but the truth was anything but glitzy. The bond between Elvis and his mother was unlike anything Wood had ever witnessed. She felt uneasy about it. She saw him being called to sit like a boy on his mother's lap one evening. That was sufficient. Natalie was shaken as she departed. She didn't discover anything in Elvis that she had anticipated. Anita Wood had a 5-year lifespan. When Elvis saw her and took her into his world, she was a TV personality. However, she was no match for what followed. Anita knew the game was over when Priscilla Presley came on board. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She moved out of the way and released the man who was unable to resist temptation. The most significant name in his romantic history, Priscilla, followed. The most contentious of circumstances led to the start of their romance. She was 14 and he was 24. He was stationed in Germany and was a superstar. In pigtails, she was an adolescent. What began as private visits developed into a covert partnership. By the time she relocated to the United States, she was under strong orders to remain a discreet presence in his life rather than a romantic partner. He maintained her seclusion, molded her persona, and safeguarded the fantasy. In 1967, they got married. He was 32 and she was 21. Lisa Marie trailed behind. The marriage, however, was a show. Long, lonely evenings, infidelity, and medications were the burial ground of true love. She took the illusion with her when she left in 1972. Elvis continued, nevertheless. He pursued the excitement despite being married. According to Connie Stevens, he was one of her greatest loves. Gorgeous, exhilarating, but risky. It was lust on a movie set within Helm, kept secret from the public until long after he had left. She went down hard. He didn't. And Margaret came next. Viva Las Vegas was more than a film. It was a full-fledged chemical explosion. It was even more electrifying off-camera. In her memoir, she made no mention of Priscilla. She was aware that some things were best kept quiet. Peggy Lipton's tale was unique. The dream quickly soured. She recalled that he kissed like a god. However, everything fell apart in the bedroom. That was the end for her. Barbara Lee's eyes were wide open when she entered. She was aware of the guidelines. She never asked questions, even though she knew she wasn't alone. She didn't have to. For her, the time they had was sufficient. No expectations, no regrets. Next up was Linda Thompson. When they first met, she was a virgin. But she became into more than just a lover over time. She recognized the fractures in his crown and was a confidant and caregiver. She lingered longer than usual. The burden of his addictions and the spirits that followed him, however, was too much for even her to bear. She eventually departed, devastated but certain. Next to enter was Sheila Ryan. Backstage in Vegas, when Elvis was still seeing someone else, their eyes locked. It made no difference. The draw between them was felt by everyone in the room. It didn't last, though. She turned to go. He remained, whirling. Mindy Miller appeared in 1975. A fortuitous encounter evolved into late-night conversations and unanticipated emotional closeness. Before life got in the way, they had something genuine. Before the chapter could continue, she went back to Italy. Ginger Alden was his last romantic partner. She was the final lady to win his heart, and she was young, 21 years his junior. They became engaged. He promised things. But, regrettably, time stood out. Before they could walk down the aisle, he passed away. Elvis loved frequently, passionately, and recklessly. Perhaps too frequently. However, behind every scandalous kiss, every affair, and every woman who adored him, there was a guy who was still unraveling and seeking control, calm, and something that no one, not even his loved ones, could provide. But you have to go back to the beginning to see how it all started to go apart. Priscilla existed before the medicines, before the paranoia, before the glitter crumbled to dust. The king's head was too burdened by the one woman who had been there before the mayhem and before the crown. The girl who was the first to recognize the man behind the music. The true cause behind Priscilla and Elvis's divorce. There was Priscilla before the heartaches, before the scandals, before the "you ain't nothing but a hound dog" fame, before the electric hips. She was only a quiet, shy girl without a sense of belonging long before the yelling fans and the glitz of Graceanne, but everything changed when Elvis Presley entered her life. On May 24, 1945, Priscilla Ann Wagner was born at Brooklyn Naval Hospital. The shadow of loss was where her existence started. Her father, a Navy pilot, perished in a plane crash only 5 months after she was born. After her mother eventually got married again, Priscilla adopted her stepfather's last name and became a Bolu. They were often on the go due to their military lifestyle. Texas, Maine, New Mexico, and Connecticut. Every few years, moving meant making new friends, attending new schools, and saying goodbye to old friends. She considered herself a gorgeous but insecure young girl who never felt completely at home and was constantly feeling uncomfortable. The family arrived in Delville, Texas, in 1956. After making an effort to adapt, Priscilla was transferred again, this time to West Germany. She was heartbroken. No roots, no rhythm, a new nation, a new language, and new faces. However, fate operates in an odd manner. Badnaheim was the place when everything changed. When 14-year-old Priscilla entered a room during a party in a leased villa on September 13, 1959, she attracted the attention of none other than Elvis Presley, who was 24 at the time and already well known throughout the world. He felt uneasy about her. She made him uneasy and uncomfortable. For a man so accustomed to being the center of attention, emotions are uncommon. However, he bounced back fast, activated his well-known charm, and by night's end, he was totally enamored. When she returned home late that evening, her parents were furious. She was not allowed to see him again. Elvis, however, was not going to back down. He made serious vows. He would show deference. He would do as they said. What a gentleman he would be. They finally gave in. Priscilla was then drawn into a world that no adolescent girl could have imagined. Their hidden, quiet, passionate, and intense romance blossomed over the course of the following 6 months. However, Elvis took Priscilla's heart with him when he left Germany in March 1960. There were rumors back home. Anita Wood, Nancy Sinatra, and other women. Priscilla felt abandoned and forgotten. Then the letters arrived. Next came the phone calls. And the invitation that made all the difference came in the summer of 1962. Come to Los Angeles to see him. Her parents were only amenable to a lengthy list of requirements. Daily letters home, a first-class round-trip ticket, and constant adult chaperones. Elvis accepted all of it. Her parents were unaware that when Priscilla was being transported to Las Vegas, his staff had written the letters ahead of time and mailed them to them. Any illusions were destroyed by that trip to Vegas. She was exposed to Elvis Presley's chaotic real life. Flashing lights, all-night parties, incessant schedules, and medicines to keep awake and sleep. A man burned at both ends all the time. But she returned. After Christmas and another visit, she was relocating to Memphis in the spring of 1963. She wasn't even 18. The transfer was only approved by her parents under one significant stipulation. Elvis had to swear that he would one day wed her. She was to complete her high school education at a Catholic girls' school and reside a few blocks away from Graceland with his father and stepmother. Elvis concurred, but with time, the distinctions became hazy. Graceland was where Priscilla began to sleep. Her possessions took up residence. She joined the Presley family quietly and with no fanfare. She started to fantasize about living her own life, having her own voice, and going to Hollywood. Elvis was insistent, though. Memphis was gonna be her home. He was too occupied. It wasn't the proper time, he said. The tabloids, meanwhile, had no trouble following him. There were pictures of him and his co-star and Margaret from Viva Las Vegas all over the place. He denied it as PR when Priscilla confronted him, claiming it was all a ruse to promote the film. However, this would turn into a trend. The same denials, new rumors, and new co-stars. Instead of believing him, Priscilla remained silent out of dread of the consequences of calling his bluff. The docs tried, but there has been nothing left to revive. At 3:30 p.m., Elvis Aaron Presley changed into officially stated useless. Lower back at Graceland, the restroom cupboard instructed its very own tale. Dozens of amber-colored vials with white caps. Tablets for everything. Pain, sleep, strain, strength, doses no legitimate physician would dare sign off on. However, Elvis hadn't been residing in reality for years, and neither had the people round him. Later that night, a group of pathologists, Docs Eric Muirhead, Jerry Francisco, and Nal Fuo, spent 2 hours performing the post-mortem. However, at 8 p.m., only one among them, Dr. Francisco, stepped up to face the clique. Without anticipating consensus from the others, he blurted out a half-truth. Preliminary post-mortem findings showed Elvis had died from cardiac arrhythmia. No mention of drugs, no reason for scandal. It was a lie. The truth changed into uglier. But Elvis's family had begged for a cover-up, desperate to defend what changed into left of his photograph. In the end, how do you give an explanation for that? The identical man who as soon as shook fingers with President Nixon and acquired a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and threatening capsules had emerged as a complete blown pharmaceutical junkie. Weeks later, the toxicology file uncovered all of it. Elvis's blood turned into a cocktail of hardcore materials. Dilaudid, Demoral, Percodan, Cods, Coden, you name it. His frame changed into a ticking time bomb. The post-mortem also uncovered different harm. Severe constipation, diabetes, and glaucoma. Elvis wasn't just ill. He became falling apart. In the end, his dying becomes shockingly ordinary. Elvis were on the restroom, straining to have a bowel movement. The strain induced a heart assault. That's how the king of rock and roll died, collapsed on the bathroom ground, pants round his ankles, drugs in his machine on my own. However, the constipation wasn't simply an unfortunate facet impact. It became chronic, intense, and perilous, delivered on through years of opiate abuse. Painkillers would possibly have numbed his body, however in addition they stopped it from working. He took drugs to awaken, tablets to fall asleep, drugs to eat, and others to get through the night time. And someplace in the blend have been stacks of laxatives, looking to undo what the rest of the drugs had precipitated. At the middle of this pharmaceutical circus became Dr. George Nichopoulos, referred to as Dr. Nick. He were at Elvis's side for nearly a decade, supposedly treating him for saddle pain in the late 60s, however very quickly that becomes something darker. Dr. Nick had become the enabler-in-chief. Underneath oath, he admitted it himself. Lots of tablets, bottles of sedatives, uppers, and downers, and once in a while some sugar pills to trick Elvis into questioning he was getting his restore. His protection, he changed into just trying to hold Elvis from scoring capsules off the road. He claimed he cared. Somehow the jury offered it. Dr. Nick walked unfastened, labeled by way of a few as an inaccurate carer instead of a reckless pusher. In 1980, he changed into charged once more for overprescribing, no longer simply to Elvis, but additionally to Jerry Lee Lewis. Once again, he became acquitted. But the recklessness failed to stop. Years later, the Tennessee Board of Health Workers finally pulled the plug. In 1995, his scientific license changed into permanently revoked. Too little, too past due. And then came the theories. The armchair professionals and a few scientists who claimed to have examined a lock of his hair. A few pointed to a genetic heart condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a thickened heart muscle. They said it could provide an explanation for the fainting spells, the fatigue, and the excessive blood pressure. However, while you look at the full photograph, his length, his behavior, the medication, the steady pressure, the horrible weight loss program of fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, do you actually need an extraordinary sickness to provide an explanation for what passed off? Elvis wasn't just a sufferer of genetics or terrible luck. He changed into a man chewed up and spat out by using reputation, surrounded by yes men, and trapped in a lifestyle that didn't leave room for help or honesty, like Michael Jackson, like Prince. Another icon was a personal health practitioner who passed out prescriptions like sweet till the track stopped. And in the long run, Elvis died now not simply from a coronary heart attack or tablets or constipation, but from being Elvis, from the load of who he needed to be. Every unmarried day, he died a lonely man locked internal a mansion that had become his private heartbreak hotel. And the enthusiasts who had once screamed his name were left grieving the man they knew. And the reality they in no way noticed coming. Do you think Priscilla made the right desire by way of strolling away? Percentage your thoughts with us within the comments under. Remember to love, percentage, and subscribe. Additionally, click on the following video proven on your display screen. You may revel in it.